Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com video presentation. So I guess we'll continue to do some more of these comments. I'm going to just keep arguing that it's just all an evasion. The simple argument is I don't see your evidence, okay? You have this tiny little weird experiments that frankly are contradictory. They violate basic principles. I mean, you're not supposed to be able to create momentum or destroy momentum, and yet you think you can. So, I mean, it doesn't make much sense. So you have a 350-year history of a theory, and in all of that time, you don't have any go-to experimental data to demonstrate it as an absolute truth. You don't have it any examples of it taking 9 times the fuel to go 3 times as fast, and those numbers just get worse and worse as you go faster and faster. You don't have any evidence that when something hits something else, something other than momentum is exchanged. That is, there's no evidence that if it's going 3 times faster, it's going to do 9 times the impact, that there'll be 9 times of something happening. All the evidence points to there'll be 3 times something happening, 3 times the crushing of the car, 3 times this, 3 times that. So there's absolutely no evidence that this 2 units of force, because that's all you get from gravity, can possibly be converted into 4 units of anything. All right, of substance, of meaning. The fact that it creates 4 units of distance is just a consequence of the fact that you're accruing velocity. And if you correct 2 units of force, you're going to get 4 units of distance just because you're going faster and faster. But it doesn't mean you're going exponentially, you've acquired more energy. You're just going twice as fast. You just weigh twice as much. You're just in the gravity twice as long. Now, these are the arguments that have been made, and there's been no counter argument to those statements. I've made 5-minute videos making specific arguments about the specific elements of this experiment and this understanding of what gravity does and what a force does and forces and momentum. And none of those videos will they play and respond to and explain where I'm making a mistake. They just keep saying that I have to learn with the special knowledge, but they can't produce a single link to the special knowledge. They can't produce a single link to evidence that the special knowledge has anything to do with reality. So that's the context. All right. I mean, for fuck's sake, even way you engaging, even way you engaging is giving him way too much credit. I mean, again, it's just so again, they prefer that the conversation doesn't even take place. They think that they've overwhelmed me with evidence when they've underwhelmed anybody rational or fair with the lack of evidence. The fact that they can't link to anything. I mean, I bring up the Eddington experiment. He posts links to completely different experiments with completely different variables, testing completely different things, and says, there, isn't that good enough? Isn't that the same thing? No, it's not the same thing. I mean, it's just amazing. Way too much credit. Maybe if you do a stream. So, what would do a stream mean? I mean, it would be. I'd be glad to do that, and I'd ask them, do you really think denting clay with round objects is a way of finding out how much energy it has? Do you think that's good physics? Do you think the de Chardolay show experiment was good physics? Can we get physicist Michael to answer the simple question? Was the de Chardolay clay experiment good physics? Can he answer the question? And here you are defending, no, let's not have the answer. I mean, you're amazing. You're such creepy, cruddy humans. All right, do a stream with him. You can hold his hand live. Again, I don't need my hand held. I need my questions answered. How is he going to hold my hand when I ask him the simple question? I throw 1,000 atoms going 1 mile an hour out one side of my ship. I throw one atom going 1,000 miles an hour out the other side. Does my spaceship turn? And if his answer is no, then he's conceding kinetic energy can't move anything. It can't do anything. It's not real energy. He's just conceding. He's throwing theoretically 1,000 watts out one side of the ship and 1 watt out the other side of the ship, and somehow it doesn't make the ship move? I mean, come on. You're ridiculous. This is a ridiculous comment to make in light of the fact that you can't answer any of these questions. You can't do it. Dick would. So, Dick, would you please answer the question? Do you think the spaceship is going to move? I throw 1,000 watts out one side and I throw 1 watt out the other side, and all I do is change the configuration of the mass and the velocity. You're saying that, what does it do? Same momentum is going out both sides. Different kinetic energies. What's your answer? How do you solve that dilemma? And frankly, it's a dilemma for your theory. Because you're going to have to basically say kinetic energy doesn't move spaceships. Which means it doesn't move anything. Alright. Live and short circuit his brain for him so he doesn't spin into torturous delusion. So, I mean, what? And the delusion is, I believe, momentum as a concept is well grounded in physical reality. Yeah, okay. I mean, damn. You gotta untangle his confusion. So where's my confusion? It's clear, frankly, it's just absolutely clear that gravity is a time-dependent force. If you don't think it's a time-dependent force, you're clearly deluded, not just confused. All right, with meters per second per second. So again, you're still going to just pretend that because you have a mathematical interpretation where you can square a second, even though it doesn't make any sense, there's no such, you can't draw a square second. You can't conceptually describe what a square second would look like or what it would do or how it would do it. It's a nonsense and absolute. It's a square pound. It doesn't mean a damn thing. It's so silly. And here you are saying this silliness should be obvious to everybody. The square pound should be perfectly obvious what a square pound is. Alright, just focus on holding his... of honing in on this and put all other stuff on pause because holy fucking hell. So what a retarded comment. That somehow you can, fix the fact that you have zero physical evidence just about, and you've got this notion of a squared pound. I'll just keep saying square pound because it's just as idiotic. So if somebody invents a square pound, we're all supposed to fall for it. And we're going to be ridiculed and made, fun of and name called because we don't believe in square pounds. Shit. And then he types a second comment. So see, some of this comments is just a wasted time because these people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. I mean, all the other points of contention, not your other content. Your other content, whatever the other content is. Yeah, exactly. The propaganda versus the propaganda. I don't mean the propaganda. I mean the propaganda videos. Anyway. Alright, so this is bass and bass to physicist Michael. Although I appreciate the attempt to clarify, right, to just keep reasserting that per second is rational conversation and that a square second is a rational concept, a square pound. This is the very guy, right? Physicist Michael, who talks about how you can't fuck around with units and you got to get units right. And then he invents the square pound. Okay. The part I want clarification on is why do the meters per second squared thing? Why do it? Why do you see it as necessary? Well, yeah, why don't you show us its origin? That'd be interesting. I mean, it's an 1800s origin, right? It's not Newton. Newton didn't write per second, right? He didn't write second squared, did he? No, I don't think so. And frankly, where does it come from? That's a good question. The idea that a time needs to be squared in order to understand acceleration. Yeah, why is acceleration exceptional when it's just an addition or subtraction in your velocity? So you have a velocity, you have a substance, velocity, a thing, and all you do is take some away or you add some, and somehow that isn't a velocity. You're not adding velocity, even though that's exactly what it is, an added velocity or subtracted velocity. So even though it's indistinguishable once you've done it, once you've acquired an acceleration, it's indistinguishable from a velocity, somehow it needs this squared term. All right, the ms accounts for both the distance and the time already, and if you want to determine an acceleration, why just do it for every 1 unit of time? For example, like mentioned in previous comments, going from 60 to 65 in 5 seconds, why not just look at it for every 1 second you are going 1 mile an hour faster to get to 65? Where is the example? Do I need to square time? Well, all you need to know is that it's 5 of those units. 5. It's just 5 units of whatever we've decided the unit's going to be. You don't need to process the units as if the units are being multiplied. The numbers are being multiplied and divided. The units aren't. The way I see it, in 5 seconds I'm going to go from 60 to 65. Yeah, well, whatever. You've already been there and done this. All right, so Brozo chimes in. So this will be a waste comment. This is probably a waste of time. So he's quoting that. Not entirely. It's and again, for just he says for these negative reasons, because somehow this gives them confidence. Somehow watching somebody evade the point made makes them feel so much better about their belief system. So when I ask the question, why haven't they repeated the Eddington's experiment from space, and he completely evades the question, he feels good about it. Some of us benefit from it, but listening to Gary's responses really is a waste of time. Right. And listening to the 5-minute videos where I explain exactly why I believe what I believe and why I don't believe what you believe, and you countering those videos with some kind of comment where you actually point out where I'm wrong about something, which you won't do. I mean, it's not a difficult task, and you won't do the task because his only goal is to mouth off and draw it and explain it. Yes. It's just amazing. Spending 10 minutes worth of material over 500 hours. So he thinks physics, number one, is a 10-minute subject. And frankly, even this subject all by itself obviously turns into more than that, because you can talk about, well, what happens when you drop a round thing into a surface? When you put a non-linear thing, you make a non-linear thing connect with another thing that's linear. What's going to happen? Even that question alone deserves 10 minutes. Anyway. With no intention of actually learning. So again, learning what? Learning how to think badly, learning how to do poor logic, learning how 1 + 1 = 4. Yeah, I don't need to learn 1 + 1 = 4 because it's not the right answer. 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, he's very good at giving the impression is eager to arrive at the truth. No, I'm eager to see the truth defended. That's what I'm eager to see. I'm eager to see the lawyer stand up and provide evidence. That's what I'm eager to see. And I don't see that on your side at all. All I see is propaganda. Okay, I see you contriving experiments to emphasize a point rather than to even understand that you can't do it that way. Launching things off surfaces, for example, or dropping around things into clay. You can't get to the truth that way. Through dialogue, but it's all just a vehicle to raise his profile. So again, it's my videos aren't the ones playing the Google game with ads on them. So you have videos that get 100 views and you put ads on them. Why? Because you're playing the game. And then you point your finger at somebody else who isn't playing the game, who's really taking a degrade in the visibility of my videos are going to be punished for not having ads on them. Google is going to punish them for that reason. And you're pretending that I'm after the views? No, I'm after the arguments. That's why I'm constantly trying to get somebody to actually play the real arguments I'm making instead of your hideous and completely distortive paraphrases. You're so fucking dishonest you can't even recite my opinions correctly. And then you'll keep doing it over and over for years. You'll keep saying things like, it's the experiment he said would solve the problem. Yeah, if it's done correctly. It's a perfect resolution. So you're saying your proven springs don't conserve momentum. I'm just saying that's a rather bold claim. And it should come with a little more corroboration than just you say so and that you've contrived an experiment that produces that result. Your spring launcher device, your piece of plastic shitty device, proves it. And all mankind should now believe it because your plastic solder sucker says so. Well, I think the evidence should be a little better than that. Okay, to get his voice heard by a wider audience. No, an audience of informed, thinking people who are capable of doing logic. And then they can explain to me why we are all accepting a theory presented by a man who thought Descartes and Newton were two atheists, okay, and who presented his theory with no evidence. No physical evidence supporting it. Why is everybody believing that? I want somebody honest to show up and give the explanation for why you're believing in a physics that was so underproven. Okay, to recruit new apostles. So again, there's no effort to recruit. So all of this talk is just so disgustingly untrue and dishonest and just covered in lie. There's absolutely nothing here, any evidence whatsoever that I am trying to train people or trying to in any way persuade them with anything other than a logical argument, that I'm trying to be their friend or create apostles or do any of that kind of nonsense. Absolutely zero evidence to defend this nonsense this fucking lying piece of shit spews on public boards, who will hero worship. So more absolute nonsense. Where is there any fucking evidence that I could give a fucking shit about ever hearing an applause? I'm totally uninterested. I want to hear what the dissenters have to say. I want to hear the counter argument. And I can't solicit it out of you lying sacks of pus, no matter how many times I plead with you to draw a lever and explain how you think it works. What exactly makes the half mass so hard to push? What is it? Explain to me what you think this counter force is that stops lighter things from going faster. What happens to create that phenomenon? You can't explain it. You're too much of a coward to say God did it. Oh, God, you're such a liar. Is as some kind of outspoken, unrecognized genius. So again, more absolute crap. This isn't about how smart I am. It's about how fucking dumb and dishonest you all are. I keep pleading with you to even just say it. Well, I wish physics did more experiments, and you won't even say those words. You're such pathetic, Borgish, fucking devotees. You're sitting here playing your banjo so loud that you can't possibly recognize that the bandwagon you are on sucks. That the physics, the science has been really bad. And you can't even admit it. You have no physical evidence. You have almost zero, nothing. The Newton's cradle has existed forever, and they've never bothered to figure out whether they can do their free momentum experiment with it. And you think that's good science. You're endorsing science that bad. Oh. There's times I say, how low can this piece of scum go? This is such a scummy, useless fucking pile of tripe. Is there any physics in this argument? No. It's just a waste of time. A bunch of ad hominem crap. Alright. Thankfully he's failing to do that. Failing to do what? Where have I failed anywhere in this argument? I'm just saying you're the one is going to be on the ash heap of asshole. You're the one that's going to be a poster child for a fucking jackass. Exactly what not to be on planet Earth. This is what creates failed civilizations, is assholes like you talking way beyond your competence. This is the real liability of having a little bit of brains. Dangerous fucking goddamn thing, as you make quite clear. You're articulate enough to type a few fucking goddamn words and spell them correctly, and that's it. Otherwise, you have no integrity, no honesty, no knowledge, nothing. Disgusting. Alright, so now physicist Michael is going to respond to Basin Bass when he's asking the same question again. Why the fuck do I bother squaring a second? When you say for every 1 second you are going 1 mile per hour faster, that's exactly what we're doing with these units of acceleration. So again, they're not units of acceleration. You're saying time is squared. It's not a unit. A square second is not a unit, so it has to mean something. The square is obviously going to square a number you're going to put in front of that s. You're going to put a number in front of the s, and you're going to square that number. Oh, fuck. When I say the acceleration is in meters per second square, that is the same as saying acceleration is in meters per second. So again, what sense does it make? Of course, it's meters per second, and it can happen more than once. So, but until you see it happen more than once, or you know it happened more than once, I'm not putting anything here. There's no number here until you put a number here. And frankly, it wouldn't be divided by those seconds. It would be multiplied by those seconds. It's meters per second times how many seconds did you do it. It's not divided by how many seconds you did it. All right. For every 1 second, the velocity is changing by some number of meters per second. Yes, and so why are you dividing anyway then? It's a multiplication, frankly. The units you're describing would be expressed as 1 mile an hour per second. Fine. I mean, I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. Because it puts it in the right units, right? I mean, it's 1 second, and so you're only getting 1 second out of an hour. So 1 second into an hour is the number you're going to divide. Is the number you're going to produce to say what percentage of 1 unit of force did you get, which exactly matches up with the statement for every 1 second you're going 1 mile per hour faster. And again, why don't we just leave it at that? Every 1 second. So again, square the 1, and then you'll see that, well, that's kind of pointless, isn't it? A squared second doesn't mean anything when you're talking about 1 second. It's 9.8 meters per 1 second. So even that they won't counter-argue. So nobody will explain here how it's not 1 second, that the real ratio is 9.8 to 1. That's the real fraction. It's not an unknown. It's not a question mark. It's a 1. It can't be 9.8 if it isn't a 1. Will anyone respond to that statement? Can any one of these commenters write or express a rational statement explaining how it isn't exactly the truth? That it's 9.8, you put that number there, and you just aren't putting the 1, but it is there. You're obligated to understand it is 1 second. Because if I changed it to a 2 or a 0.5, I'd have to change the 9.8. The 9.8 is only true when there's a 1 in front of that seconds. That's the only time it's true. Now go ahead and refute that statement. Refute how that is wrong. They won't do it, of course. The only difference is that when we use meters per second, we're saying for every 1 second you're going 1 meters per second faster. I mean, it's just no point. Maybe another way of looking at it is if an object undergoes a certain acceleration for a certain amount of time, then the change in velocity will just be. Well, it will just be velocity. The change in the velocity is going to be made out of velocity, and acceleration is just a velocity. You either add a velocity or subtract a velocity, but that's all you're adding or subtracting. A unit that already exists, a velocity, meters per single second. Why, when you're adding or subtracting it, is it a second squared? When I add it, somehow it's a second squared. When I subtract it, it's a second squared. What sense does that make? There's just no point. Change in velocity equals acceleration times time. Acceleration is already a velocity, so there's no point. Why are you multiplying the velocity times the time? It's already a velocity. It's already in meters per second. It doesn't need to be in per seconds. So again, that's just wrong. It's an acceleration, period. How much time it takes for it to accelerate is not something you put in there and say, this is how much it took to accelerate. It took 5 seconds to accelerate. It's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything to the acceleration. It's a useless term. There's absolutely no reason to say the change in velocity isn't exactly just the change in the acceleration. You want to call it acceleration. It's a change in the velocity. All you've done is add or subtract velocity. There's just no point. In the case where the acceleration is 1 mile per hour per second, then if I wait for 5 seconds, the change in velocity is multiplied 5 times 1. It's 5 seconds. No, anyway, or 5 miles an hour in this case. Yeah, so he's multiplying it right here, 5 seconds. So what's the problem? There's no division by a second. All right, anyway, I think you'd agree with this, but notice how in that equation the units second cancel out and we're just left with the change in velocity. Yeah, exactly. So why did I go with that? There's no, it's just too ridiculous. Anyway, let's do the same thing with my example of a car, 15 to 25, 5 seconds, blah, blah, blah. So they just keep going over this as if this is math when it really is a concept. So the change in the velocity is a whole unit of change. And all you're saying is, does that whole unit of change happen more than once, or does it happen less than once? And then there has to be some percentage of that change. But that's all there is. Like he did right here, 2 meters per second. I don't need this second squared. And I just say times 3 seconds. There. 2 times 3 is 6. You can check the numbers from my previous post to make sure that over any 3-second period the velocity changes by 6 meters per second. But notice what happens with the units. So I'm not interested, frankly. So maybe I just won't bother reading. I mean, he's talking to the other guy. They want to do this math thing. In the meters per second squared term, I mean, I've already pointed out why would a velocity, a change in velocity, be in second squared and a velocity be not in second squared? Why would I say 60 miles per hour for the acceleration, and when it's got a velocity I just say 60 miles per hour, period? I mean, it's the change is the change. It's not per hour. All right, one of the seconds units in the denominator gets canceled out when multiple, so they're just playing the math tricks. Okay. In the last equation, note that we would have just expressed the acceleration in meters per second. When we multiplied by time in seconds, the seconds would completely cancel out. So again, they keep thinking the units are the numbers. I mean, the numbers are what you're doing the math with. The units are almost irrelevant in just establishing that the only thing we have to compare is weight and length and time and what else is there? So that's all they exist for. You don't multiply units, leaving us with the same units of meters. And meters are not the unit of velocity. So even though meters are, in fact, the unit of velocity, right? It's meters per second, so I don't know why you would say that. My velocity did not change by 6 meters. It changed by 6 meters per second. No, it changed by 6 meters of added velocity, added to your velocity. Your velocity was whatever it was, 5 meters, and then it changed to 6 meters per second. And that's all that needs to be known. But whatever, there's just no point. So now you are one of us. This is Woto. I don't know why he's quoting that. It's a John Walker comment. Too stupid. He was a long-time draft cultist, so I don't know what evidence they have of this, who has answered his guru's call that someone should ask physicist Michael. So the fact that somebody would answer the, actually say, yes, it's a reasonable question, maybe you should answer it, that's a bad thing. So that shouldn't happen on the internet. So again, they're just against any challenge to their dogma, any challenge to the authority, their religion. It's just so funny. LOL, I thought he was a 9th grader. So now they're just going to insult him because he asks the same question I might ask. Or, frankly, he's asking different questions. But anyway, he's putting it a different way. And that's the best they can do. Why does Draft read text on screen like he's dyslexic? Well, maybe he is, but who cares? Is that critical to you? So again, this is what's important to them. That if somebody doesn't read well, that somehow that means they can't think and they can't do anything. I don't know how well Einstein could read, frankly. So this is all they've got, right? So instead of linking me to their evidence, showing me some great experiment, showing me the analysis of dropping round things on clay and how it doesn't distort the results and gives an accurate description of actual energy, instead of doing that, they do this horse shit. So whatto? You keep repeating the sequence 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Yes, I'm pointing out how it's the distance that is increasing exponential. Well, not exponential, but you know what I mean. For distance traveled per second, but you fail to see that the same sequence can be written as 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. I don't know. The fact that the total distance is going to be in those numbers is exactly my point. And the only difference between the odd numbers is just pointing out how much you're adding each time. So one of them is the total, and the other one is how much is added each time. When written as a total distance traveled, yes. So why isn't this an important fact? To me, it's an important fact that clearly it's the distance that's doing this growing thing. Okay. Every 5th grader will immediately recognize this. So every 5th grader doesn't. So that's just a huge lie. We know that most 5th graders aren't paying much attention. So, full of shit. Statement. You know that half the people don't even know America. They couldn't find it on a fucking globe. So fuck you and this every 5th grader will immediately recognize this as a sequence of squares. So again, that's just too silly. But what it is numbers. You can understand it conceptually, or you could understand it as mathematics. And so I would argue that you can. It's like you could understand Pythagorean theory by just understanding, without even thinking about the squares, or you could draw the triangle and draw the squares on the lines and then understand how the areas would be changed and how it makes sense to use area to figure out how long a line is, because they're all squared areas. Okay, so that's a huge difference. And so all I'm saying is conceptually is understanding this is all about distance. And whether it is a sequence of squares or not isn't going to change the fact that it's distance, not time. Okay. Total distance traveled is, drum roll, seconds squared. So again, the fact that the seconds are incidentally related to the distance in gravity because it's a constant force doesn't mean that the seconds are in fact the thing, okay, that is growing. The seconds aren't growing exponentially. They're not growing by this squared function. That's not actually happening. It doesn't actually happen. The distance is the thing that's obviously doing the growing by the enhanced squared rate. All right. Will you now accuse Galileo of being Leibniz's grandpa in disguise? So we know that Galileo had nothing to do with Leibniz, so that's clear. And clearly Galileo didn't believe in kinetic energy, whatever the fuck that is. He had no notion of it. He would also say twice the force, twice the speed. Okay, Galileo was essentially a Newtonian. Okay, but he wasn't a fucking Leibnizian. It's just so bad. So this is some new spit guy. Please do a video explaining Gary. So they're not very good at. Not very good. Do a video explaining Gary how to get the distance traveled as a function of acceleration and time when falling in gravity. So again, I have a 5-minute video explaining how gravity works. Why don't you explain how a single thing in that video is incorrect? There is absolutely nothing about the distance that tells you that gravity is producing 4 times the force. It's clear there's only 2 seconds. It's clear it's a 9.8 meters per 1 second. It's clear it's only going twice as fast after 2 seconds. All of those are clear facts, and you won't go anywhere near them. The distance are something he is able to calculate in his own way, so he can see the function is giving the right answer every time. I don't even know what that even means, so we'll just pretend this guy doesn't comment because he's as dumb as Falwell. Speaking of Falwell. All right, let's see. So after you spoon feed him, so again, I've challenged him to play a 5-minute fucking video and explain how I've made any errors in it, and he won't do it. So I mean, what the fuck? He spends an hour and a half doubling down on his misunderstanding. So I'm giving you every opportunity to explain what exactly I'm misunderstanding. You're saying 2 units of force is 4 units of energy. You're clearly saying it. And you're saying it over Newton's voice also. So you're saying Newton was wrong, and Newton was kind of fucktarded because he didn't see this obvious fact. Now why don't you explain it to me like you would explain it to Newton? So why don't you do that? Explain to Newton why it's really 4 units of energy even though it's 2 units of force. Okay. Or just blatantly ignore everything that was offered to him. So what was offered? No fucking experiments demonstrating any of this bullshit. No drawing of a squared second. No anything like an explanation for why I should believe in this woo, this Sasquatch. He seems to just enjoy wasting people's time and efforts. You people seem to enjoy squandering the dignity of humanity. Just making a laughing, silly joke out of what it is to have a brain on planet Earth. You refuse to do logic. You refuse to fact-base your arguments. You just talk absolute crap and are proud of it. You're gutless cowards. You won't respond to the actual arguments that I've made. I think I have proven beyond any reasonable counter-argument that gravity is a time-dependent force, that just like photons, it's about how much sun you're in will decide how much sun you get hit by and how much tan you get. And there's no other way around it. You go through it fast, you're not affected. You go through it slow, you're affected a lot. Fact. Fact you won't refute, you won't counter-argue, you won't explain, you won't do a motherfucking thing but talk absolute shit, okay, about people who have asked you a simple question and you have no answer. Alright. Cowards, just despicable cowards. So we do have to pause because you have to kill the ads and go through this bullshit to reload the. Alright, so we do have something new. This computer is just not working quite right. Anyway. All right, so Basin Bass says, doesn't your example not work if we just change the rate to even numbers? For example, in 5 seconds of acceleration, 1 second could be 20.25 miles per hour. The next could be 90.9. The next one could be 1.1. Okay, whatever. What I am asking is for y squared time when in my example going 60 miles per hour to 65 there is no squared function necessary. Hopefully this points out the point I want to make. So I guess I'm not getting the point you want to make, so frankly, because this is just playing with the math numbers again. I don't see the point. There's no confusion what the numbers are and the fact that you're dividing a number. Again, if it's 9.8 meters per second and I want to find out what 1/3 of that is, I don't have to worry about units. I just multiply by 1/3. I mean, it's just nonsense to say if there's no unit, it doesn't mean anything, but if there is a unit, it does mean something. It doesn't matter whether I put seconds in the units. It's just silly to multiply and divide the actual units. They're not things. They're just designations. Each velocity has its own distance and time while the seconds remain the same. Where in this example would I be doing miles per hour per second squared or miles per hour per second? Where I'm stumped on this idea is going from 60 to 65 in 5 seconds. I need to do the square function to understand the acceleration when the velocity already gives you the distance and time, and the seconds is a constant unit. Why would you in the first place care? If you know the total acceleration is going to be 6 miles an hour or whatever it's going to be, why would you care whether it's 1 mile per second of acceleration? It's not telling you anything really interesting, is it? All right, quote, which exactly matches the statement for every 1 second you're going 1 mile. The only difference is that when we use meters per second, we're saying for every 1 second you're going 1 meter per second faster. Why not just say for every 1 meter you're going a second faster? Again, they're just going to go back and forth with the semantic word games. And the word game should just start with, what the fuck is a square second? How do you square a second? And the second point to make would be, isn't it 9.8 meters per 1 second? Isn't that the actual truthful ratio? There is an actual truth. And the actual truth is, it's not 9.8 per any number of seconds, or per a squared seconds, or per any of that crap. It's per 1. So if you're going to use something other than 1 second, and you're going to say squared seconds, then don't you have some obligation to tell me how many squared seconds it is? Because it can't be 9.8 if you're going to make it 5, or 7, or 25. Then you have to change the 9.8. So you're just breaking the simple ratio. The simple ratio is 9.8 meters per 1 second. And it is explicitly 1 second. So conquer that argument. Reply to me in some way where you explain how it's not 9.8 per 1 second. And then again, squaring a 1 is kind of pointless, isn't it? Yes, it is. So, there's nothing else you can do. Like I said, they have no physical evidence to speak of. I mean, any physical evidence they have can be countered by the opposite physical evidence that says, well, look, if I do your bang a light thing into a heavy thing and I get free momentum, well, why doesn't it happen in a Newton's cradle? If it happens on an air track, or it happens with your little rolly cars, why doesn't it happen in Newton's cradle? What's preventing the Newton's cradle from making the free momentum? So why doesn't the free momentum experiment work with a Newton's cradle? That would be another question that deserves an answer of some kind. Form constructs some kind of answer to the simple dilemma of why isn't there any evidence of the experiment being done with a Newton's cradle? All right. So, till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot. It's just so dismal. The evasions, the evasions, the evasions of every single point made, none of them responded to. Nothing. No response to a single point I make. Nothing. Just insults and crap.